A landlord collecting $7,000 a month can earn a worse return than someone collecting $1,500. In Singapore, residential rental yields sit near 3%. In Dubai, they can be more than twice that. Manhattan becomes even stranger. A small studio can yield above 7%, while a huge luxury apartment in the same city falls below 4%. The rent is higher, the return is lower. So why do the world's most expensive properties often produce the weakest income? Take two different rental realities. Apartment A generates $5,000 a month, or $60,000 a year, but the property costs $2 million. The gross rental yield is 3%. Apartment B rents for a much smaller $1,500 a month, $18,000 annually. But because the property only costs $225,000, the gross rental yield is 8%. Apartment A collects more than 3 times the rent, but Apartment B produces more than twice the yield. Gross rental yield equals the annual rent divided by the property value. The tenant pays for housing services, the top number. The buyer pays for asset ownership, the bottom number. When the property price rises significantly faster than the rent, it compresses the yield. These two numbers move independently because they are driven by different forces. Tenant income places a ceiling on rent. People can only spend a specific portion of their monthly wages on housing. Property prices, however, are fueled by the buyer pool's accumulated wealth, previous home equity, and global financing. The buyer pool often has far more capital than the renter pool has monthly income. A low rental yield does not mean the rent is cheap. It means the property price is high relative to what a local tenant can afford to pay each month. Singapore and Hong Kong are island geographies with hard limits on physical space. This scarcity dictates the economic relationship between a property and its tenant. In a premium district in Singapore, a private one-bedroom apartment can cost $1.1 million. The monthly rent is roughly $3,000. While the tenant is paying a significant monthly sum, the high capital value results in a gross yield of approximately 3.3%. Buyers in these markets often value the property as more than a rent-producing machine. They pay a premium for political and legal stability, wealth preservation, and currency stability. Much like government bonds, investors accept a lower income return in exchange for perceived safety. Hong Kong follows a similar pattern. Severe land scarcity means a modest apartment can command a purchase price of $650,000. Even with a monthly rent of $1,850, the gross yield remains near 3.4%. The rent is not cheap, but the capital value required to secure the space is massive. Owners in these cities pay for the right to occupy an extraordinarily scarce asset. Foreign acquisition taxes increase the capital outlay even further. The rent stays the same, but the higher total cost dilutes the true income return on the cash deployed. In Manhattan, the relationship between rent and return shifts without ever leaving the same neighborhood. Recent asking market data shows a clear inverse relationship between unit size and yield. A $675,000 studio renting for $4,350 produces a gross yield around 7.7%, but as the units get larger, the yield falls. A one-bedroom yields around 6.2%, and a two-bedroom drops to 4.5%. By the time you reach a $9 million luxury apartment, the yield sits at 3.6%. While thousands of professionals can afford a $4,000 monthly rent, the pool of tenants capable of paying $27,000 a month is vanishingly small. However, the number of buyers with several million dollars in existing wealth is often much larger than the number of households willing to spend that much on a monthly rent check.
Wealthy buyers will pay a premium for privacy, views, and permanent control. Tenant wages, however, place a hard ceiling on how high those rents can scale to match the purchase price. London demonstrates why a single citywide average is often mathematically useless. The city contains multiple yield environments. Prime central London apartments often produce gross yields between 2.5 and 4.5%. Moving to the outer boroughs, yields can climb above 6%. Central buyers pay millions for international recognition and prestige. While renters also value these locations, the rent premium they pay is smaller than the purchase price premium paid by owners. In the outer boroughs, purchase prices fall much faster than the local rental rates do. The location that offers the highest prestige for an owner is rarely the location that offers the strongest rental yield. Dubai examines a different relationship, with apartment yields averaging around 7. A continuous pipeline of new housing prevents asset prices from detaching from the economic value of rent. Kuala Lumpur demonstrates how a lower entry price alters the yield equation. A premium apartment might rent for $1,200 a month. While that is lower than Manhattan in absolute terms, the property only costs $250,000. This results in a gross yield of 5.8%. High yields in these markets often compensate investors for the uncertainty of transient populations and future supply competition. If a district can quickly add thousands of new units, future rents face more pressure. Global wealth inflates the price of scarce, constrained locations. But in markets with continuous housing supply and lower entry prices, the rent-to-price equation stays more closely aligned. Gross yield is merely a starting point that ignores almost every cost. This chart shows the deduction of service charges, management fees, property taxes, and maintenance. A headline 8% gross yield can quickly become a 4% net yield. Vacancy causes immediate damage. One empty month reduces annual rent by 8.3%. When debt is added, mortgage interest further changes the leveraged cash flow. Tokyo illustrates how price growth compresses yield. If an asset appreciates from $500,000 to $700,000, while rent only increases slightly, the rental yield falls. The landlord collects more rent, but the asset price rose faster. Headline gross yield is a theoretical maximum. The actual retained return is shaped by local taxes, fees, and market cycles. This latter shows the monthly rent required to maintain high yields on $1 million property. A 3% yield requires $2,500 a month. To reach a 10% yield, the rent must hit $8,333. Very few local households can afford the top rungs of this ladder. This wage constraint is why extremely expensive property naturally produces weaker income yields. Yield and capital movement are separate components. If a property price falls by 20% while the rent stays the same, the yield goes up. A rising yield can be a mathematical signal of a weaker property market. Singapore and Hong Kong show how globally valued property produces low yields despite high absolute rents. Manhattan and London show how size and location compress returns within one city. Dubai and Kuala Lumpur show how lower prices and strong supply keep yields higher. Do not ask, how high is the rent? Ask, how much property value is required to collect that rent? The rent check tells you how much the tenant pays. The yield tells you how hard the property is working. And the net yield tells you how much of that work the owner actually keeps.